The CEO is a very unique animal. It's an animal that hunts, thinks, sleeps, and lives differently from all other species. It has its own language and its own instincts. It eats last and has worries that no one else has. The CEO has thoughts it can't express to its employees, to its friends, and to its spouse. It's an animal unlike any other animal. I'm Alex Gertzberg, and this is CEO Confidential, where we learn about this rare breed, one heartbreak, one victory, one story at a time. This show is sponsored by the law firm of Gertzberg Licata, your ally for business growth. All right, Ben Bebenroth, culinary master, samurai, farmer, not samurai, but culinary samurai, farmer, advocate for creating sustainable agriculture and wild edibles, chef and owner of Spice Catering Company, Spice Acres Farm, and Spice Kitchen and Bar. Did I get all those right?
Yep.
Good. Ben, tell me about that time when your COO started a mutiny in your company.
Oh, man. One of the most valuable experiences of my professional career in retrospect. It was pretty incredible. So I had graduated from 10,000 Small Businesses in, I believe it was 2013. And from that, I found my way into EO Cleveland. And I'd been in EO for about a year and a half, 2 years at this time. And I was convinced that we needed some high-level professional direction, right? I've had a troubled relationship with money throughout my life. I misinterpreted it as selling out. I'm fairly renegade kind of guy, fairly against the grain. I was a punk rock kid in high school due to my own, I read a lot of Edward Abbey. I read a lot of Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky and things like this, which is ironic that I found myself in the Marine Corps later. But I was convinced coming out of my second year of EO, like, God, I need somebody to steer this company in a way that I'm not. I'm a little bit too renegade. I'm a little bit too principle focused, where I'm throwing all this effort at a break-even farm just because no one else was doing it. So I brought this guy on. We'll call him Mr. H. All right. And Mr. H came in and had a lot of experience running larger organizations. He was recently retired, really knew his way around a P&L and an accountability chart. And I was convinced that, okay, he was close to me in proximity. He was close to me in the clients that I would frequent. I'd see him at a lot of parties, he was part of our circle, if you will. And so he came into the company in the summertime. I believe this was 2015. Sounds about right. And he started turning over these rocks. We were about to hire a marketing person, and he helped with the interview process. And I really liked the way that he helped us kind of stay strategic and tactical and not get lost in these principles of operating and values of the company, of like local food and all this stuff. He kind of helped me see, hey, you're trying to get somebody to get more transactions happening here. It doesn't matter if they shop locally. It matters if they can activate other people to do so. So he was helping me think outside of the box.
I'm sorry, Ben, did you say that you were already running on EOS at your company at this point? Okay.
No, not yet. I was in EO.
EO, not EOS. Got it.
Yeah. I was an EO member. It was probably my second year as an EO member. So I was getting challenged by my forum mates. I was getting challenged by my staff. And I had a partner at the time who was my founding partner in the business, Josh Wu, who was my director of operations and executive chef. And we had just got the farm. So I was in my first year of the farm lease as well, Spice Acres, which was taking an enormous amount of time.
So you've got a restaurant in Lakewood at
Mhm.
this time. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
Gordon
you
Square.
just, right. And then you just opened up your farm too.
Correct.
Started
Correct.
working your farm. Okay, keep going.
Yep. So, so we brought this guy on. Another big part of the win was that he was like, "Hey, I don't really need to make a lot of money. I've made a lot of money. I just want to be involved and want to help your organization." So we were doing something like $1,000 a month for something like 20 hours a week. Felt like a value, and he really was a charismatic person. So he won over the staff. Right, the staff really enjoyed his presence, which also allowed them to create some trust, and you need that. If you're going to lead people, you need trust.
Right.
So yeah, he started kind of like forming these relationships, and I would check in with him, and I would check in with my team, and everyone was enjoying Mr. H's presence. And then I had this event in Boston that I was going to receive an award from the ICIC for creating inner city jobs. And there was this big workshop, and Michael Porter was going to present. So I took my parents and my kids and my wife, and I said, let's all go to Boston for 5 days. This is a 3-day workshop. We'll eat some seafood. We'll walk the Paul Revere Trail. We'll have a great time. And while we were there in the workshop, my daughter came down with pancreatitis, which went undiagnosed for 5 days while we were there. So all from walking in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery and my son and her arguing, and I'm pretty sure it was an elbow strike that just hit the right spot. But we were in like 3 different hospitals there, and it was one of the most challenging experiences of my adult life, watching a child suffer like that in undiagnosed level 10 pain for a week. So I was there longer than I anticipated. We came home. We went right into the Cleveland Clinic. We were here. I was just being brought to my knees with prayer on the daily of seeking answers. And it basically extended a period of 5 days that I was leaving my team unsupervised with my COO that had been there maybe 2 months at this time. It extended that to a period of 2 to 3 weeks, I think. Unsupervised. Ben is not here. This dude's in charge. And he's really starting to create these inroads of trust with people. So long story short, my daughter was healed almost immediately upon getting home to our family GI. And I was able to return to work with this newfound focus and appreciation for family and all this. And it was then brought to my attention that we had some issues in the company, according to Mr. H, that were going unaddressed. And I was kind of actually enabling them by holding a marketing relationship very close to heart, which my wife was our marketing provider. And at the time, Jackie and I have always had kind of a push-pull relationship of working together. We're both drivers. She has her own company, Muse, and does amazing strategic branding work and content creation. And, I'd often been the favor. You know how that can go in family businesses.
Sure.
And my COO sat me down and said, we have to have a heart-to-heart here about some tough realities in the company. And I said, great. This is what I brought you on for. Like, yeah, pull the covers back.
This is when you get back to town.
This is when I got back to town from Boston. And my daughter was fine. She's home. Everything's good. We came through it. And I said, yeah, great. Let's do it. And he said, Josh and Jess and I would like to meet with you for coffee. And it's like, okay. Like, Josh is my director of ops. Jess is my business partner and director of catering. So he took me to a coffee shop in the neighborhood where the restaurant was. And basically they were waiting for me. Right. And I walk in and, I get a coffee and I join them and I'm like, gosh, thanks guys so much for holding it down while I was dealing with, Boston and Sydney's illness and all this stuff. And then this guy says, I've come to understand that your wife is extorting money from the company through her egregious marketing charges. And I just kind of I did a double take. I looked at Josh and Jess and I was like, are you guys on board with this? Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, this is, this is what she's charging and blah, 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 blah. And do you really think $100 an hour is reasonable and all this stuff? And I said, well, she came in $4,000 under budget for the last, 6-month period. So is it expensive? Yes. Is it worth it? Yes. But it's not egregious, man. It's less than 10 grand. Like, and he just said, I think it's time that we have a talk about how your wife is controlling the company through these decisions. And I just looked at Josh and Jess and I was just like, okay, pardon my French, you're fucking fired. You forgot who you work for, and it's me. And this is not happening. So you can leave. And Josh and Jess were just like, what are you doing? Like, and I was a very emotional leader at the time. I will admit that. I was dealing with some addiction issues. I had a really bad bone-on-bone arthritis situation with my left knee. So it was not a good time for me to be reacting as a professional. I was definitely coming at it from an emotional space. And I looked at Josh and Jess and I said, they actually said, we need him. And I was like, oh, we don't need him. We need this, which is open communication. This is what we've been needing. And I was already teasing at the idea of EOS at this time. So this guy just gets up and he was like, we're done here. Walks out of the coffee shop. And where did he go? He went back to the restaurant and trash talked me to the entire rest of the staff. While I sat there and navigated this with my two senior leaders, Josh and Jess, and they were in tears. I mean, Jess was crying. Woo was like just at a loss for words. He was not a crier, but he was just like, dude, what the fuck was that? And I'm like, great question. I would like to know as well. So we get up, everybody's heated. I walk back to the restaurant. It was like a block from the restaurant. I walked back to the restaurant just fuming. And I got ready to just wave my bloody sword around this place. I called an all staff emergency meeting in the private dining room. And I always say, you got to leave a little blood on the sword so people know what it's for. Running a kitchen is like running a pirate ship, man. Like, you're constantly cutting throats and then pumping up the team to grab a new one, grab more bodies to get the fight done. And so I gather the whole team in the private dining room, and I'm about to just launch into this tirade about like, anybody here who thinks that, this guy had it all figured out, get on the bus with him. You're out of here. And as I'm like about to launch into it, I just crack. I had a total nervous breakdown in front of my team. I mean, I'm talking, there was probably 30 people in that room. And I just couldn't hold it back anymore, man. It was like I was at my emotional breaking point before this guy brought this ego-driven decision to me. And the surmounting challenges of navigating a child's illness and running a business like this and dealing with all this stuff, it was just too much to handle. And I admitted to my team about my dependence on alcohol and narcotics, of just trying to, deal with this waiting period until I could get my left knee replaced. And I was just overwhelmed, trying to create the farm, trying to run the restaurant, trying to keep the catering going, and then trusting in someone to run the business in my absence. And then returning to this was just, I couldn't believe it.
Wait. So you're up there, you're talking to 30 people. You divulge this addiction issue that you've got. When I hear you say I had a nervous breakdown in front of my team, I'm like, wait, I'm in that private dining room. What am I seeing right now? What is Ben saying to the team other than the addiction stuff? I mean, what's happening?
I opened up with basically whoever is on this guy's side and thinks that my wife is extorting money and all this stuff, get out right now, and as I'm saying it, I just get overwhelmed by emotion
Mm.
And it just, I don't even know, man. It was like, there was no bridge to that. There was no entry into, oh, and by the way, I'm having all these problems, right? It just hit me and I just started crying. And I was just like,
Yeah.
I just had to admit to them that I was at my end. You know, I didn't know how much more effort I could possibly be throwing at this, of trying to do all these unrealistic things of running, you know, restarting a 13-acre farm and running a restaurant and writing the special menu and all this stuff. And everybody was just silent. Like you could have heard a pin drop. And I just kind of like crumpled into a chair and I just sat there and I just apologized to everyone. And I was like, I'm sorry that I'm letting you down. I'm sorry that this didn't work. And I'm sorry that I don't know how to handle it. And I got a couple of hugs, you know, and it really let me be okay with being vulnerable, because like as a chef, I came up through kitchens where like throwing pans and screaming, and it was a really aggressive environment to train in the 90s and early 2000s. And you never saw chefs be vulnerable. You never saw them be human or have emotions, you know? And it was almost like I had done the ultimate unforgivable thing as a chef, which was break. Like you don't break, you know? And I broke. And it was like there was nowhere left to go. And that was when, it's so crazy to think back on this, but that was when, you know, about 2 weeks later, I brought it to my team and I just said, you know, my forum is implementing EOS. I had to present to my forum about what happened with my COO, and which was emotional, and all of the things that came along with that. There was just a lot of baggage there, you know? And I got all these experience shares from these people about how they've navigated addiction, how they've navigated emotional overload and all these things. And then that was the month when all of us challenged each other and said, we're all going to implement EOS in our businesses to some degree or another. And I brought that back to the team from Forum.
So Ben, this is you said 2015 is when this goes down. Yeah. Approximately.
It sounds about right. Yeah. 2015, 2016, something like that.
So how old are you 6 years ago?
I was 37.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and it is interesting, right? Like you're a Marine, right? Tough as nails, running multiple businesses, high stress. And by the way, and I personally think that running a restaurant is like the most stressful thing of all the kinds of businesses that you could possibly run. I don't know if you think that, but I think that. I know a lot of people agree with me about that. But I just wonder if you can deconstruct a little bit that moment when personally, I think the firing of the dude, would you do that differently?
I mean, now that I'm no longer trapped in these addictions and have, you know, my physical pain has been repaired and all these things. Yeah, I'm not at that threshold, right? I can walk into a situation now and I can observe myself being triggered, right? I can observe myself feeling an emotion and being like, oh yeah, you're definitely pissed off right now. Hold your words.
Why? What happens between 2015 and now that allows you to be able to step outside of yourself and see your emotions bubbling up and be able to observe yourself?
Well, I got drugs and alcohol out of my daily life. It was a huge part of it. I don't have a restaurant anymore to deal
but you're still dealing with stress. Everybody is.
I am, for sure. I really leaned into my personal meditation practices and my health habits. And I have teenagers now, you know, and they test me on the regular. And I feel like that really strengthened my mettle of like, I have to be able to take a stressful situation at home and navigate it as a parent and show them like, this is how you handle stress. This is how you behave, right? Whereas before, it was like the louder I screamed, the more pissed off I got, the more fear I could instill in my people, and then the more obedience I would have, right? Where that's just not the world we live in anymore. I think we've changed. The society has changed a lot in the past 5 years. But I've changed a lot in the past 5 years. I've finally acknowledged a lot of my misgivings and shortcomings and been able to name them, identify them, and call them out. Be like, hey, you guys know I have a low capacity for, data. So don't talk to me about numbers after lunch on Wednesday. And I'm serious. Like,
Yeah.
I remind my partner all the time about that. So I'm just more self-aware now.
I heard someone say that at the bottom of every emotional distress or breakdown or whatever you want to call it is fear. There's fear behind every outburst, every reaction, everything. You and I are both meditators. Do you read Tara Brach at all? Follow her. She's fantastic. No. Oh, she's so good. And she talks about and writes about the limbic, being in limbic hijack, right? The limbic system is like your animal brain, right? Or your monkey brain and
lizard brain for sure.
Yeah. And you just get stuck in reacting, and you got to rise above it and see and look down on yourself and see how those reactions are happening involuntarily. She talks about how fear drives a lot of these emotional limbic situations. Do you think that was at play at all for you in some way?
Oh, 100%, dude. I mean, like I said, I just did this really deep healing about 2 weeks ago. And I had a really rough trauma when I was a kid. I almost killed my brother when I was 12, whom I loved to death. And now I've been working through this, meditating through this, writing through this realization that a lot of my alcoholism and drug abuse and all that was just compensating for fear of being alone, fear of not being enough. A lot of my tattooing, I identified that I was trying to infill my personal experience with enough pain to show my parents that I was worthy of being loved like my brother was loved for the pain I caused, right? This is crazy stuff, but it's not, right? Because it all goes back to that center point of like, do you have a core tenet of being enough, navigating through challenging situations through love, or are you navigating through fear, And I just got done listening to a podcast from Finian Kelly, who's an EO member out in Boulder. And that's one of his core principles of intentionality, his modality of operating. Yeah. And it's true. Looking back on that situation, I was afraid of everything collapsing. I was afraid of having to do all these jobs by myself, Yeah.
And so out of this crisis springs some positive things, right? Obviously, I mean, the self-awareness that comes from the last 6 years shines a light on that time period, right? But EOS came out of that, right? Other lessons, other positive things that came out of that moment.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously I approached the team about implementing EOS. We went forward with that, fast forward, 5 years now, almost. And now we're implementing EOS for other companies, not under EOS. We've modified it a little bit for food and beverage and whatnot, but not only that, but what really came out of that was this acknowledgement that the answers are not external. There's no miracle hire that is going to save anyone's company, right? If you're managing from fear and leading from fear, an authoritarian regime, right, it's going to crumble. There's no way about it, that you cannot grow a business and attract positive people and positive energy with that negative wavelength. And I've truly started to accept that in my life of just, dude, you got to let the energy flow through you. And if it's coming through you positive and coming out of you negative, well, don't be surprised of what you get.
So the other thing I'm thinking, Ben, I mean, your employees saw you at your most rawest, your most vulnerable, your most naked moment, right? From which what I heard you describe is a feeling, there was some feeling of shame and some feeling of embarrassment, right? I mean, that's not a bad thing, right? I mean, that had to have created a connection with at least some of them. I mean, you hear about the vulnerable leader and leading from vulnerability. I mean, that's about I don't think I've ever heard an example, right? Even though that was untethered, it was still totally raw. Talk to me about how the connection with your employees evolved after that and as a result of it.
Yeah. So about 2 weeks after that, I remember my partner, Josh Wu, told me that they were leaving, and his wife was an event planner. He was my director of ops, right? So now I lost my COO. I lost my marketing guy that day because he was in that camp. He did actually take my my advice of, if you're on his bus, it's leaving now. Then Josh told me that they were pregnant again and they had to move home. And that's where it really brought me to, okay, we're going to implement EOS because we can't grow this company on people alone, right? Because when a person leaves, now we're just waiting for this next silver bullet person to come in and save us. But we need a process that we can plug people in, graduate people out of. And we want to grow people, right? We don't want to hold on to them and stifle them and make all of our problems their problems. So that came from that. And my partner, Jess, very in touch with her emotions. Her sister is our controller, Liz, amazing, great people. But that relationship grew significantly from that vulnerability. The one thing I'll say there is the vulnerable leader, I think, enables and encourages his entire team to be equally vulnerable. And this was not an example of that. This was an unplanned, untethered, no direction, uncontrollable vulnerability that I wasn't able to reciprocate for other people, right? It was almost like after it happened, I wanted to just shove that memory in a box and be like, okay, don't ever talk about that again. Get back to work, which was impossible, right?
Right.
It's impossible.
Yeah, I guess that's right. You know, I was kind of applying my own filter there, right? Like, but I can see how it could also kind of terrify people, right? And it sounds like a few of them were, but yeah. So we've got great lessons learned here, and that's really what the purpose of this podcast is, right? Is to just try to extract the do-overs, the lessons learned. I mean, yeah, there is a way to be vulnerable. Being mindful is the most important thing. You have a mindfulness now about your leadership and about reacting to stressful situations that you didn't have then. You and I have to talk about meditation a lot more after today, because I'd like to learn how you do it.
Vice versa.
You can definitely, in my case, the longer I go without meditating, the more like that I am. There was a time when I couldn't leave courtroom, Alex, in the courtroom, and meditation really pulled me off that ledge a lot.
Yeah, my family has a Sunday morning nickname for me, and it's Chef Ben. Yeah. And it's just when I bring the restaurant version of me home, and and I still work on that, but the meditation really, really helps. I'll also say one of the big things that moment of vulnerability really gave way to over time, of course, was a toolkit to identify issues with people and then tie it to where it's coming from, right? One of those tools being TTI, disc profiling. Just an amazing tool to say, oh, this is how you prefer to be communicated with. These are your, ways not to communicate with this person. And also we do an exercise called the 5 dials, which we pulled out of EO.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with it?
Somewhat. Yeah. It's interesting. We had a meeting today. We've got 4 dials that came out of that, but yeah, no, you go talk about 5 dials.
So it's basically, picture yourself, you're in an airplane. The pilot has a heart attack. You're the most able-bodied person on the plane and you have to land it. What do you do when you get in the cockpit, right? Well, like any limbic thinking person in an emotional state, right? You're in a lizard brain mentality now. You're going to grab on the biggest things, right? So the yoke, the power, you're probably not going to start switching all these little things, right? You're going to grab big stuff. So what are your 5 dials? And, for me, it is the health of my family, the health of my relationship with my wife, my personal financial standing, my relationship with my leaders, and the financial standing of the company. If one of those 5 things is off, it's very difficult for me to 100% show up for a moment and be there for other people. And now I know that about all of my leaders in my accountability chart. So we check in on those 5 dials, and it's one thing to be vulnerable, but it's another thing to be able to actually filter a moment and support someone else or show up for someone else. Because really, it's not about me. It's about me giving of myself to my team so that they feel supported enough to be excited about getting the job done and moving the company forward, So those aren't, I don't need to know my dials as well as I need to know theirs.
Yeah. Yeah. The related concept there is that when a pilot is flying the plane and you look at every cockpit and there's like 100 dials there, there's 100 little dials. The pilots are they're paying most of their attention to like 5 of them. And they only go down from the big ones to the little ones when something's off in those 5 dials. So when you're running a company, there's so many. I'm like you with data, by the way, right? I went to law school because I couldn't do math. So, so for me, that resonates with me a lot. There's all this data and all these metrics in every company, but the leaders really need to pay attention to the big ones enough to know when to start drilling down to the small ones. That's a really powerful concept, the 5 dials. It's so coincidental that we were literally talking about that today. Ben, you're amazing. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. Folks, you want to, I'm telling you, you want to learn a whole lot more about Ben Bebenroth. You're one of the most interesting cats I've ever met. All of his links are in the show notes, the LinkedIn, the Instagram, his company website, which I'll just tell you right now, spiceheadquarters.com. Check that out. Ben, you told me you've got a Saturday morning thing going on your farm over the summer. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so we do U-pick events for the seasonal perennials that we have on farm. Right now, we're in the middle of our purple asparagus season. So about 8 a.m. to noon, you come out, there's plant sale. You can pick shiitake mushrooms. You can pick purple asparagus. We have raspberries that jump off in the middle of the season, pumpkin patch at the end of the season. We're right here in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. So this is the only national park in the entire United States that's preserving land through agriculture. So it's a very unique project. And yeah, it's a great place to make a family memory.
Well, and I tell everyone this, and I'm going to do it again because it's my podcast and I get to. So we ate at Ben's restaurant when it was open, Spice, and it was my then girlfriend, my now fiance, and the whole concept of farm to table. We were like, there's no way, right? You read the menu and yeah, we picked this stuff this morning and it is now on your table. And come an hour, fast forward a year later, unfortunately, the restaurant is no longer there. Shut down, really COVID driven shutdown. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I find myself in EO. Turns out Ben's in EO. Ben does an event for EO where they bring the food to your house. They show you how to cook it. I tell my forum mates, we have to try to persuade Ben to do a forum dinner for us, which he does. And it is one of the greatest meals I think I've ever had. So Ben's Catering Company, folks, if you want just the most amazing food, the freshest food, just expertly prepared right in front of you. And I mean, you want to call Ben and Spice headquarters and get that done. It was such an amazing meal, Ben. Thank you for that. And thank you for being here and letting me interrogate you and telling your amazing story. Folks, we will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to CEO Confidential. I hope you enjoyed it. Visit us at ceoconfidential.net and visit our sponsors, the business law firm of Gertzberg Licata and Cover My Six, a business solution that flushes out and repairs legal minefields before they blow up in court. We'll see you next time right here for another episode of CEO Confidential.